All right, let's talk Dallas Cowboys. I'm Nick, and this is our daily Cowboys show. The Dallas Cowboys, of course, still in the afterglow of an impressive Monday Night Football victory over the Raiders, but they're not resting on their laurels. In fact, they recently made a pretty significant move that spells a lot of what they're trying to do in the short, medium, and long term. We'll get to all that, plus all the other great news in just a second, but let's get things started, as we always like to on this channel, with a little stat of the day, a little palate cleanser, if you will. And I want to pull up this graphic courtesy of the Computer Cowboy X account. And what they do is they break down the NFL, all 32 NFL teams, by tiers. And they do it grading their offense and their defense using expected points added per play, EPA per play, which is just a really solid analytical model to see how a team's doing or not doing. Instead of looking at total yards or total points scored, they look at it on a per play basis, which isn't without its flaws, but it's a pretty good metric. But I want to focus on the Dallas Cowboys. They find themselves in the bottom right-hand part of that quadrant there with a very good offense. The offense is the x-axis, and a mediocre defense. The defense is the y-axis. But I want to point out the fact that for the vast majority of the season, the Dallas Cowboys were battling with the Cincinnati Bengals for having the worst defense in football on an EPA per play basis and for a lot of other metrics as well. But now the Cowboys have leapfrogged significantly ahead of Cincinnati in the right direction. They're actually ahead of the New York Giants and slightly ahead of the Washington Commanders right now, as it currently sits, as having the fourth worst defense in football, So we can call that improvement. We can call that a step in the right direction. And statistically, it certainly is. Now, the Cowboys do have some tough games in front of them. They still have to play the Chiefs. They still have to play the Detroit Lions and, of course, the Philadelphia Eagles coming up. But based on the raw data, the Cowboys are playing better defensively. A big part of that, of course, was their performance against a not great offensive team last Monday night, of course, in the Las Vegas Raiders. But listen, the addition of Quinnen Williams, Overshown back, Logan Wilson, Shavon Revel, Kalen Carson, safety's getting a little healthier. Listen, they're playing better, right? It's a step in the right direction, and I think that's what we all want to see with this defense going forward. It's still with a lot of flaws. It's undeniable. The edges are still very flawed outside of Donovan Ezeraku. Linebacking core is young and inexperienced. Obviously, Logan Wilson, brand new. Kenneth Murray, obviously, still isn't a great player. Shamar James Young, Overshown coming off of injury. Leofau Young. Corners, again, same thing, talented, but young and inexperienced. In safety position, still isn't exactly the best, safety group in the National Football League. Far from it. I'd still say they're probably bottom five, if not even worse when it's all said and done. So the defense still has a lot of flaws, but they're certainly better. Quinnen Williams helps out a lot there. And I think that's what we want to see from this Cowboys defense going forward is just improvement, right? You can't get rid of what the first 7-8 games of the season put on film. But the reality is if they can be a better bunch, a more talented bunch, and just play better football overall, obviously this team will benefit. And I think we're all excited to see what they do. Again, it's not a group that's going to be elite. I don't think anyone expects this defense to massively leapfrog up the rankings here. But we want to see improvement. We saw the first steps of it Monday night. We'll have to see over the coming weeks and final half of the regular season what they can do defensively. But so far, at least, the trend is in the Cowboys' favor on defense. All right, let's get into the news here. This was a report that dropped. I think it's pretty important, courtesy of @VoiceOfTheStar on X. He has two posts here. The first one, Brian Schottenheimer tells me the Cowboys' available roster seat created by waiving Damone Clark. They waived cut linebacker Damone Clark. Could very well be for the activation of Perry and Winfrey from IR. The team will monitor Winfrey more this week before deciding. It didn't take them very long for their monitoring process, and then Walker responded, and it's official. Perry and Winfrey has been activated by the Cowboys. The former all-UFL team defensive tackle is a go. So Damone Clark has been cut. Perry and Winfrey has been activated. Winfrey taking his roster spot. Now, this is sort of an interesting move, right? Obviously, Damone Clark, who was started week one, was a big-time player for the Cowboys, at least on a reps basis. Week one had been benched. He hadn't really played any sort of significant snaps. So from a roster spot, basis, it doesn't make sense to keep him on the active roster. But it just speaks to the overhaul and the great unwinding I've talked about a long time when it comes to this Cowboys defense. Just getting rid of all that Dan Quinn style, that Dan Quinn mentality, and those Dan Quinn players, right? We see Trayvon Diggs, the issues he's had integrating on IR. Listen, is Trayvon Diggs even going to come back into the fold? I don't think so. I think the Cowboys like what Kalen Carson brings. Again, not a perfect player, but young, talented player. Revel's going to get more snaps, of course. You look at Deron Bland's going to continue playing a big role. Reddy Stewart doing some good things in the nickel. Where does Trayvon Diggs fit in this rotation, right? And do you even want him to? Do you just keep him on IR and just kind of let him ride out the season? I think that's where the Cowboys are heading right now because, again, Diggs just doesn't seem to integrate in what the Cowboys are trying to do. And Damone Clark was one of those last vestiges of that Dan Quinn era. Remember, he played a lot of football in 2022 and 2023 under Quinn's defense. He was their kind of linebacker, not very good against the run, was a guy who could play in space a little bit, solid in coverage, but basically was sort of that style of linebacker where, listen, you don't have to really, do a lot of traditional linebacker things because our whole focus, our whole mentality is just to attack downhill, get after the quarterback, jump every route, create a lot of takeaways, create a lot of sacks, things like that. Getting run up the middle for 6, 7, 8 yards for 3 straight carries isn't the end of the world because eventually we're going to get a sack or a pick six or something like that. And the Cowboys have done their best to try and reverse what that mindset has been this season, and they've done a pretty good job of it, right? Obviously, the new addition helped. Of course, for the linebacker position, credit where credit is due. They traded for Kenneth Murray, obviously didn't work out. They added Sanborn, obviously didn't work out. They drafted Shamar James, young player, we'll see what he can develop into. Then they added Logan Wilson into the fold. They benched Damone Clark, gave Maris Leofau his reps. So they've made a lot of changes at the linebacker position to try and figure something out, and the trend looks good for them. Long way to go, of course. It's all going to hinge on, really, if we're being honest, how good Overshown can be in the long term. If he can go back to becoming a star, this linebacking core is going to be great. But the reality is this is just a whole different team than what we saw just 2 years ago with this hyper-aggressive, hyper-downhill Dan Quinn defense. And you also notice at the same time, Dante Fowler is getting fewer and fewer reps. And he hasn't had a disastrous season. He had a slow start, but he's played a little bit better. And again, part of it is because he's gotten fewer reps, so less is put on him. Sam Williams, who did some good things with Dan Quinn as the DC prior to his injury, really has had a disappointing season, if we're being totally honest, outside that block punt against Arizona. So a lot of the Dan Quinn guys are basically being phased out slowly. And listen, I think it was necessary. As we've seen in Washington, the defense has a good start, has a good surge, it turns things around, and teams figure it out. And right now, the Cowboys, Eberflus, Shoddy, the entire football team are reconstructing this defense with a new mindset. They're heavy on the defensive interior, not so heavy on the athletic linebackers. The linebackers they've won in the game are guys that can be versatile, that can do a lot of different things. Again, still got to figure that out. Obviously, a lot of it, like I said a second ago, hinges on Overshown and him recovering from his injury. Did a few good things against the Raiders, looked pretty spry, pretty athletic, had a tackle for loss in space. So some good stuff there from Agent Zero, but it's very clear the Cowboys are doing everything they can, as they should, to put the last vestiges of the Dan Quinn mindset, the Dan Quinn players, in the rearview mirror. And I think it's going to be a big reason why this defense hopefully will continue their trend of improved play. All right, this next report is a list of the snap counts, courtesy of Nick Harris at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and he cites PFF as his source from the Cowboys' win against the Raiders. So at defensive end, you can see Ezeraku leads a group of 32 snaps, as you would expect. He's been basically leading this group for the last 6-7 weeks. He's become quite a good player, as we all know. But again, it kind of speaks to what I was talking about, the last vestiges of the Dan Quinn defense. It's Ezeraku, Houston, Jadeveon Clowney, before Sam Williams, and then Dante Fowler's, again, being basically backbenched here with only 11 snaps for the Cowboys against the Las Vegas Raiders. He's been getting fewer and fewer snaps, right? You guys notice this trend here. You look at defensive tackle, Oso Odigizua and Kenny Clark with a lot of snaps. Quinnen Williams in the mix with 33. Basically the similar amount of snaps there. I think there were a few packages where Quinnen Williams wasn't quite up to speed yet, but he played 33-plus snaps, of course, had an outstanding game. Put out a film review of Quinnen Williams yesterday, so if you guys are interested, make sure you check that out on the channel as well. It's going to be a film review of Ezeraku's performance as well coming out later this afternoon, so if you're interested, make sure you guys take a look at that. Linebacker, how about Logan Wilson with a lot of snaps? And then, of course, DeMarvin Overshown with 31. Shamar James with 26. Murray with also 26. And then, of course, Leofau with 15. Yeah, the feel's about right. The Wilson seems a little bit high because I think certainly that long drive the Raiders had in the second half where they basically were more quick screens, more spread, got a lot of Logan Wilson on the field. And obviously, they had my least favorite word in the English, or least favorite phrase, I should say, the pitch count, snap count that they had on Overshown. 31 snaps seems like a good number. Shamar James, again, he got a lot of snaps because of so many passing situations. Kenneth Murray, again, I think that's that 25, 26, 20 snap number. I think that seems to be a good role for him if it's in the right situations. And I think getting him, fewer snaps and more targeted snaps is really helpful to him. He had a solid game. Again, a lot of this is against a bad Raiders offense, so there's a little bit of how good is the competition. But Murray put together a decent outing, obviously had that deflection that led to an interception. So maybe having these many players, and guys, they have a lot of guys on here that played a lot of snaps. So they rotated a bunch of guys, and maybe putting a bunch of these players only in positions to be successful. I know this sounds kind of hilarious to say this out loud, but maybe that's the best path forward. I mean, it's tough to do that because you want some sort of stability. You want to have a lot of, you don't want to have a million rotations going on because it creates a lot of volatility. But the reality is, I mean, they had, four defensive ends play 26 or more snaps. 3 defensive tackles play 33 or more snaps. 4 linebackers play 26 or more snaps. And the corners, we had 3 corners play 20 or more snaps, and 3 safeties play 20 or more snaps. So again, we're talking about a lot of guys that played a lot of football, and I get it. A lot of it is switching up situations based on what the Raiders were doing. But maybe this is the plan going forward. Obviously, there's a little bit of a spin-up time with Revel and Overshown and Quinnen Williams a little bit as well. So there's going to be that factor, potentially Logan Wilson too. But I think the Cowboys playing so many different guys, so many different snaps, may help, help out some of the deficiencies, right? Does Shamar James have to be a short yardage linebacker, an every down linebacker where he struggles? No, maybe if he just lives in coverage situations, he's better, which I think he actually was better in those kind of situations for the Cowboys against the Raiders. Leofau, not a lot of snaps there, but I actually like that because to me, he's one of these forces who can do damage. He can impact the game with 1 snap. He's a guy that doesn't need 50. I don't think you want him on the field a ton. You want him on the field in the right situations where he can use his physicality and just raw power and just aggressive nature to impact the game. I like that snap count for Leofau. And I think, honestly, Kenneth Murray's number will probably continue to drop as Overshown gets more. Logan Wilson probably will get a little more snaps too going forward. But again, this is what we're seeing from the Cowboys. And when you go to the cornerback position, that's where things get really spicy. You have Kalen Carson with 60. Again, a lot of action for the young corner. Had a solid game overall, again, against the Raiders, but he had a decent game and a little bit less snap counts against the Arizona Cardinals. So it was easily the 2 best games of his career back-to-back for the Dallas Cowboys at this point. Good to see for Kalen Carson. Obviously, he's a guy they seem to really like and has done well. Have to see how he continues to develop going forward. Deron Bland, of course, with a lot of snaps. He had a solid game once again. A little bounce back from the Cardinals game. He's had a good year overall, Deron Bland. Then Reddy Stewart, again, that 20-ish snaps at the nickel, kind of certain packages. That makes sense. He's got a good role there. And then Revel into the mix with 19. I think for the most part, he looked fine. I mean, there was nothing where I was like, wow. But in his first live NFL game against, again, not the greatest competition, ran well, I think covered okay, had the 1 penalty. But other than that, I thought it was a solid performance. And Kyer Elam totally benched for the Cowboys with 0 snaps. I think the big thing to focus on when it comes to the cornerback position is how different it is in week 1. And you can pick every single position group, linebacker, defensive tackle, and defensive end, of course. But the Cowboys came into the season with, okay, it's Diggs, it's Bland, and then Elam's going to be our guy, and then we'll wait to see what happens when the Revel comes back from injury, right? That was sort of the plan. And then Carson and Butler were going to be the depth guys. Basically, Elam's become the depth guy, and Trayvon Diggs will probably become the depth guy when it's all said and done, if he even is ever activated once again. Butler, of course, is still coming back from injury. Good to see him whenever he returns to practice. But you can see the cornerback room. I think that's what it's going to be going forward. And it's a lot of youth, guys. You got Kalen Carson, 2nd year. Reddy Stewart, 2nd year. You got Revel, who's a rookie. Deron Bland, he's been around the block a little bit, but he's not like a wily vet or anything like that. So this is a young cornerback room. Excited to see how they continue to grow together. There's going to be mistakes. There's going to be some bumps in the road, of course, because you got a lot of youth, a lot of inexperience. Same thing with linebacker, right? Overshown, again, he's, I think, started top of my head, maybe 15 games in his NFL career. Still young. Shamar James is still young. Leofau still young. Logan Wilson is a vet. Hopefully, he can stabilize a little bit as he gets more familiar with the Cowboys defense. But it's a young group at cornerback and at linebacker. And then when you look over at the safety position, you can see Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker, Marquise Bell getting a lot of snaps. I think a big part of that, and it's something to keep an eye on, is just more Wilson and Hooker coming back from injury because the Cowboys love the pitch count methodology, it seems. Have to keep an eye on that going forward. I thought Bell, he did have the interception off the deflection. He just doesn't look like a great safety, though. He just moves a step slow. His speed and acceleration doesn't look quite the same. I think it's one of those things where, is he a disaster player? not against the Raiders, but I think he was not very good in the 2 games prior at all. So it's one of those things with Marquise Bell to keep an eye on. Will he actually play significant snaps going forward, or will they just rely on Wilson and Malik Hooker to get more snaps now that both guys are back from injury? Something to keep an eye on there for sure. All right, but the big takeaway, guys, before I move on, is massive rotation. A bunch of guys getting a bunch of snaps, a lot of new faces, and a lot of young faces, especially when you get away from the defensive line. I mean, this is a completely different team than what we saw week 1, let alone than what we saw last year. I mean, it's just a completely different mindset, completely different squad, completely different approach. All right, this next report is courtesy of Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star. Tyler Guyton allowed 1 pressure and 0 sacks on 34 dropbacks, despite being 101 for 79.4% of his pass pro reps. Versus Max Crosby, he allowed 0 pressures. On top of that outstanding outing in Las Vegas, Guyton also earned an Oscar nomination for that flop he had to draw an extra 15. Now, to be fair, he did get punched in the face, so it was a penalty by the Raiders. The flop just made it a little more obvious. So, it's one of those things where it should have been called regardless. But Guyton had a solid game, and I think Guyton's one of these guys is if he can continues to improve. Remember, people talk about Guyton in the ups and downs, and obviously disappointing rookie season. He's had some good things this year as a run blocker. He's great. His physicality and effort, guys. When you look at the film, the guy plays with a lot of effort. He's running 20, 30 yards downfield. When George Pickens is doing his crazy stuff, fighting for every inch, run every single time, like, oh geez, I feel like a fumble's about to happen. Guyton's right there, right next to him, ready to throw a block, ready to get downfield. So I love his effort. I love his attitude. His run blocking has had its moments of being dominant. His pass protection has had its moments of being dominant. So I love the effort. I love the physicality. And now we're seeing some flashes of elite play. Consistency will be the name of the game of Guyton going forward. If he can become more consistent, they got a stud at left tackle. And when you look at the rest of the offensive line, Tyler Smith, stud. Cooper Beebe, underrated player who's really good. Booker looks like a really good guard. Terrence Steele, bounce back game, but a lot of questions about what the future of that right tackle position is going to hold after this season. I think the reality is if Guyton can be more consistent, we're going to have 4 of the 5 O-line positions really nailed down in a solid way for many years to come. And that was sort of the vision that the Cowboys tried to get back into the fold in the 2024 and 2025 NFL draft. Get 3 of the 5 starters really locked down. Beebe locked down. Booker looks like he's locked down. Guyton now trending in the right direction. Obviously got to stack some more performances together. Left tackle's tough. It's like corner, right? You can have a good game one game and then just have a rough outing the next. But if he can be more consistent and maintain a high level of play the rest of the season and the rest of his career, the Cowboys, again, when they drafted him, Guyton was an athletic freak with a great set of skills, but was considered a developmental prospect with an incredibly high ceiling. He'll have these games like we saw against the Raiders where he matches that ceiling. Now it's about consistency. Again, his effort's off the charts. His mindset is outstanding. I love the way he plays the game with the physical nastiness. Now it's about becoming more consistent week in and week out, snap in and snap out. If he can take those steps, he'll become a stud in short order. All right, this next report here, let me pull this up, courtesy again at Patrick Walker at Voice of the Star. He's dominating the news with some good insights today. It's a great follow, by the way. You should give him a like and a follow on social media. Talking about the right tackle position, Brian Schottenheimer said last week the Cowboys should have an open competition at right tackle. Terrence Steele versus Max Crosby, 16 reps, 15 reps, 1 versus 1. 2 pressures allowed, 0 sacks allowed. Steele, I think is what he meant, right? Aced the assignment in Vegas. Yeah, so Terrence Steele had a pretty good game, all things considered. Wasn't perfect. I think Steele's one of these guys where he's a good run blocker, a below-average pass protector, and the Cowboys find themselves in a tough position because if they cut him as a June 1st veteran in the offseason, they free up a healthy amount of cap space. The problem with Terrence Steele, guys, is that he hasn't played so bad where they have to bench him. Right, he's made some poor blocks. He's had some few rough outings in pass protection where they open up the competition and then he responds with a good game. He's this classic example of this guy who's not bad enough where he needs to get benched, but not good enough where you're like, we'll take the cap hit. He's in this weird no man's land that puts the Cowboys in a tough position. I think with Diggs being a veteran release, I think with the Dak restructure, the Cowboys are going to have a tough decision to make when it comes to Terrence Steele. I still think he's probably a veteran June 1st release. I mean, you have Nathan Thomas as a young tackle. Maybe they add a veteran, a cheaper veteran for depth in the offseason and maybe draft another tackle in like the fourth, fifth, sixth round to throw another depth piece in there for the Cowboys. But I do think Terrence Steele is one of these guys where it's almost frustrating because he'll have a game where you're like, all right, this was pretty good, and then he'll have a game where you're just like, yeah, that was pretty rough. Maybe we need a change. And if you don't have that level of clarity, it makes it hard to make decisions. There's nothing better for a front office and a coaching staff than clarity. If a guy is struggling, hey, you can bench him, you can replace him, you can move on, right? The clarity helps, right? Damone Clark obviously wasn't fitting the future of the Cowboys, for example. He wasn't playing well. They replaced him. They benched him a long time ago. Okay, it makes sense to move on. Kyrie Elam, same kind of track at this point. But the reality is Terrence Steele hasn't gotten to that point in terms of really struggling, and it gives the Cowboys, sort of a weird decision to make. Because if he's playing good enough football, is it worth cutting him for the cap space? It's something to consider as the Cowboys have to make a lot of decisions, especially when it comes to what they do with Pickens, Javonte Williams, and a lot of other guys that they're going to have to decide on in the offseason. All right, this next report, courtesy of Colin Cowherd on Fox Sports 1. And Colin Cowherd has actually been one of the few talking heads on the big networks that's been, not even positive about Dallas, but I think just being honest about, what the Cowboys have done. He talked about the Parsons trade way back when and said, listen, I get it. It makes sense. And anyone with half a brain cell was like, yeah, it makes sense. Right? Even the Quinnen Williams trade, which a lot of talking heads, said on ESPN, Fox Sports, across media, said this was a terrible trade for the Cowboys. Colin Cowherd came out and said, listen, it makes sense. You're trying to rebuild the defense, work inside out, right? The great pass rushing teams, the teams with great pass rushers, Raiders Crosby, not doing so good. Browns Garrett, not doing so good, right? The Packers look good with Micah Parsons, but the Packers were pretty good last year without Micah Parsons, right? So it's one of those things where elite pass rusher doesn't necessarily guarantee success. You look at the Eagles championship team last year, a lot of investment defensive tackle. The Kansas City Chiefs obviously been to a lot of championships, a lot of investment defensive tackle. The Patriots dynasty heavily invested on the defensive interior. Defensive tackle and defensive interior line is a critically important position, and the Cowboys have been horrifically weak there. They've addressed that, right? And that's what Colin Cowherd has brought up before, again, kind of being the counterpoint to a lot of what we hear in the media. But here he talks about the Cowboys after the game, and he hits on a few interesting points. He says not all struggling teams are equal. Dallas is young. They're ascending. They've got a top 10, 12 quarterback. He talks about a lot of teams that have losing records, and he says, listen, there are some teams that have losing records where you don't know where they're going to go, right? The Atlanta Falcons, he doesn't talk about Atlanta, but I bring up Atlanta, talented team, but they got questions at quarterback, questions at coach. The Miami Dolphins, they're a very talented team. They've got 4 wins, and sort of like they've underperformed this season. And they're like, where do we go? Is Tua our guy? Is Tua not our guy? We got injury concerns, right? Is Mike McDaniel the right head coach? A lot of question marks, a lot of red flags. And of course, he brought up a lot of the other bottom feeding teams. He says, what are they doing? What's their direction? He said the Cowboys are trending in a good direction. There's a lot of bad teams that are kind of flatlining, like, picking on like the Jets, for example, the Browns, where they're like bad and there's no hope for them getting better, it seems. The Titans are kind of in this mix as well. You look at, of course, teams that have disappointed, like the Falcons and the Dolphins. They're trending in the wrong direction when a lot of people, they'd be trending positively. The Cowboys seem to be ascending, right? A very young team. I brought this up a few minutes ago. We all know it. Secondary, incredibly young. Linebacking core, mix of young and veterans, but the core of it, especially with Overshown, is young. Defensive end, a lot of question marks. They got 2 first-round picks. Ezraku's good, but again, he's a rookie. Defensive tackle has become a really good position. They've solved that for sure. Offensive line, extremely young, and if they move off of Terrence Steele, it's going to get younger. Right? Wide receivers, as much as Pickens and Lamb, great weapons, they're young guys. Ferguson, younger guys, right? Not like rookies or second year, but we're not talking like, wily vets here that have played a decade of football. And Dak Prescott is, like he mentioned, a top 10, 12 quarterback, which is fair. I don't think he's a top 3, top 5 guy, but I think he's a good quarterback. And I think he's better than, let's say, Tua, for example, for the Miami Dolphins, with the injury issues, with concussion situation, with Tua being one of the big factors there. But the reality is they've got quarterback under control. They've got weapons under control that with the extension or whatever they do, franchise tag with Pickens, they'll figure that out. They've got options from a salary cap perspective. You look at 2 first-round draft picks with a lot of teams that need a first-round quarterback. There's a chance for the Cowboys potentially getting a lot of draft capital. They've got holes for sure. Safety position, big issue on defense. A lot of youth. They need more defensive end help, undeniably so. Offensive line still young. Future of the running back position, there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of question marks. But they're trending in the right direction. And I think that's one of the things Colin Cowherd points out. And I think that's one of the things we're all seeing. right? The Cowboys in 2023, when they got embarrassed by Green Bay in the postseason, there was a big feeling by me, and I know a lot of you out there, like, okay, is this the best they're going to be? Right, they kind of went sort of all in that season with Gilmore and Cooks were kind of their veteran ads, right? They got to retool an aging offensive line. They tried to do that in 24 with starting 2 rookies. Obviously you do that with BB and Guy, and it doesn't really work out. Running back position totally fell off a cliff. Right, number 2 wide receiver fell off a cliff. Obviously, the defense the talent from the Dan Quinn afterglow completely faded, and now they're trying to rebuild all that. And really, in a matter of, if you go from where they ended the 2024 season, no answer at running back, incredibly young offensive line with questions, defense with no defensive tackle talent whatsoever. What's the cornerback position going to look like? Diggs is hurt. What's the future of that position? Linebackers still have no idea what that position could even remotely be with Overshown hurt. Now you look at where the Cowboys are today. Defensive tackle, their group, one of the best in football. Defensive end still has some issues, but Ezraku looks good. Hit it there. Linebacker position, still some question marks, but they got a lot of youth. They got a lot of energy mixed with some veterans like Logan Wilson that can stabilize it a little bit. Cornerback position is younger. We got some talent. We got Revel. We got Carson. Moving on from Diggs, most likely. So we're looking towards the future here. Bland, despite, one bad play against the Packers and a disaster game against the Cardinals, has been a good player this year. Safety position still a real concern. Offensive line is young, but like we talked about with Guyton, and we know with Smith and Booker, BB back, of course, they're playing better as a group. Running back long-term still has questions, but number 1, number 2 wide receiver, looks pretty good there. And of course, Ferguson has had a nice, solid bounce back year for the Dallas Cowboys. So there's a lot of things trending in the right direction. Offensive scheme, offensive play caller seems to be doing well. So there's a lot to like about the Cowboys. And that's what Colin Cowherd is talking about here, is that there are some teams, and this was the Cowboys in 2024, if we're being honest, that won, 6, 7, 8 games, but they don't. The trajectory towards the future looks bad, and it's one of the reasons why the Cowboys didn't bring McCarthy back. The team fought hard, they competed hard, and some of the stars like CeeDee Lamb, for example, and Parsons, they played great down the stretch, and they stole a few games, but the trajectory of the future was just not in a good direction. And sometimes you have to, it's one of those things you have to rebuild. That's why the cliche of a rebuilding year, to get things settled, and then you want to start trending in a better direction. The Cowboys, at least for this moment in time, if you just look at the roster, are trending in a better direction. Now, obviously, a lot of things to go. You got to solve a lot of problems. But if you look at, for example, the Washington Commanders, and I don't want to pick on the Commanders too much, but the reality is, right now, they've got problems, right? They've got an exciting, really good, talented young quarterback, for sure, who has now left games this year with injury 3 separate times. Big concern considering he wasn't a big physical guy to begin with. Defense is really old. Offense is really old. They don't have a lot of draft picks, right? Very, very little draft capital. They went all in this season, and they sit at 3-8 because of a lot of injuries have derailed their hopes, right? So Washington is trending in the wrong direction, right, in terms of what they want to be for the future, right? They've got an old team, not a lot of draft capital, right? They don't have a lot of opportunities for the future. The Cowboys, opposite, trending in the right direction. Doesn't mean it will work out. The Commanders could be better in the future than Dallas. I don't think so, but that could certainly happen. You got to execute on your plan, whatever your plan may be. But the reality is, as Colin Cowherd points out here, and I think we all can see, the Cowboys have done a good job retooling this roster and putting it in a better position. A lot of things have to continue to improve, of course, but I think we can all agree on this. They're doing good things to put this team back on a track to competing at a high level. All right, this next report is courtesy of Justice Mosqueda. I think that's how you pronounce his name. I apologize, Justice, if I screwed up. He noted that Packers aren't getting anything in the pass rushing department from defensive ends outside of Micah Parsons. No one has played more and had fewer quick pressures than Rashawn Gary this year. Data from NFL Pro. And he just noted that Micah Parsons obviously has done a good job generating quick pressures, and the rest of the Packers defensive line has not. I think one of the problems that the Packers have run themselves into is that Parsons' greatness and the massive impact he can have on a game is predicated on a certain style of defensive play, like, Dan Quinn, of course. But the Packers don't play that way. They play very good team defense, undeniably so. But the problem is when you play really good team defense and you've got Micah Parsons, who kind of plays a little bit like an outlier, they kind of struggle to get everyone on the same page. And one of their goals with Micah Parsons arriving was, okay, this will unleash Rashawn Gary, this will unleash Lucas Van Ness. And they've had decent seasons, but they aren't getting this same amount of production. And I think it's one of the problems the Cowboys ran into with Micah Parsons, if we're being totally honest, especially when DeMarcus Lawrence was out. With the exception of really Overshown Cornerstone emerging as a playmaker the second half of last season, there wasn't really a lot outside of Parsons generating immediate pressure and having an impact for the Cowboys defense. It's why even when Parsons was on the field, like we saw with the Packers right this year against Dallas, the defense can still give up 35, 40 points, even though Parsons may be playing well, just because no one else is playing at that same level. And it's a problem you run into when you have a style of pass rusher like Parsons who plays just at a speed. He's a speed rush guy, just an athletic freak with what he's able to do, as opposed to a Garrett or as opposed to a Crosby who can beat you a bunch of different ways with size, strength, and speed as part of a team defense, right? We saw Crosby on Monday night, phenomenal for the Raiders. He's a great player. Garrett, phenomenal for the Cleveland Browns. It's a stylistic problem. And I think this goes back to why I think the Micah Parsons trade, as great as Micah Parsons is, looks better and better by the day, especially if you look at what the Cowboys have gotten in return. Again, small sample size, Quinnen Williams' performance in one game, but he looked like a good player. He looked as good as advertised. Cowboys have an extra first-round pick. Kenny Clark, veteran presence inside. It's one of those things, part of a team defensive effort. Parsons is great, undeniably so, but if you don't have the horses around him, or if you don't create a structure around him, a defense around him, you're going to have some inconsistencies, some disconnects, like we see from the Green Bay Packers up to this point. It's still a really good defense, mind you. It's a great defense in Green Bay. But I think the reality is they were expecting, honestly, a little bit more. And that's something the Packers faithful right now are a little concerned about. And one of the reasons I think a lot of Cowboys fans, I know myself included, have said, listen, Parsons is phenomenal. He's an all-pro. But he's not Garrett, right? He's not Crosby the way he plays. He's got a certain style and a certain approach, and it's sort of just a little bit different. And if you're not ready for that as a defense, if you don't build around that, there's a chance you won't, capitalize on everything he brings to the table. And I think that's what they're seeing in Green Bay, at least when it comes to their other pass rushers. All right, and this next report here is courtesy of Brandon Lohr. Just to follow up on the Cowboys benching Pickens and Lamb for the opening drive, saying there were a couple things missed. There's been a lot of speculation about what that was. There's some people saying they missed curfew. There's some people saying they, were at the casinos in Las Vegas or something like that. It's, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate. The Cowboys haven't said one thing in terms of clarifying exactly the reason why. And so I won't speculate because I don't think that's fair to the players or the Cowboys to just assume one thing or the other. But Brandon writes, Brian Schottenheimer said when he first got the gig as a head coach of the Cowboys, he wanted to build the best culture in sports. If that's the goal, everyone has to meet the standard, even the star players. Kudos to Schotty if that's the case. Yeah, and this is one of the reasons I talked about it yesterday, being the gutsiest move the Cowboys have made in a long time. Rang just like Jimmy Johnson, rang like something Bill Parcells would do. Listen, if you're a star player and you step out of line, whether, big game, Monday Night Football, emotional game, doesn't mean you're not going to get benched. We'll bench you if you step out of line. Right, and it's just the mentality Schotty has. And again, he's not a guy that's like a yell in your face. He's not a Parcells or anything like that. He's an emotional guy. He's an authentic guy. He connects with the players at an emotional level, but he's not afraid to lay down the hammer and be a tough guy with his rules and the standard and the culture he wants to build. Again, it speaks to the long-term approach the Cowboys have right now, and I think it's the right move to make. Again, the Cowboys are an ascending team, but they're a rebuilding team, which means this year there's going to be still volatility. There's going to be ups and downs. I don't think they're a playoff team this year. I don't think they ever really were a playoff team. Obviously, their record isn't indicative of a playoff team up to this point. We'll see what they can do down the stretch here, but this is a team that's clearly building for 26 and 27. A big element of that is culture and buy-in, and I think moves like what he did against Lamb and Pickens send a message not just to those stars, who, by the way, played at a high level after that, of course, but also to the rest of the team, saying, listen, there is a standard. You will be held accountable to it, whether you're the 53rd guy on the roster or a superstar making $30 million a year and having an all-pro season. We're going to have a standard. We're going to have a culture, and you're going to live up to that. And I agree with Brandon here 100%. It's a good move by Schotty. Again, sticking with the standard, being consistent and authentic, two critical elements for any head coach. Schotty knocks it out of the park right here. All right, let's get into the comments. Let's get started with member comments, as I always do. And my promise to all the members is I will get to all of the member comments from every single prior episode, and I will get to every member comment first, and I will get to non-member comments only as time permits. So if you want to make sure your voice gets heard, please become a member. It's a big help to me. It's a big way to support this channel. Let's get started. David Dobbins, 5887, as he always does. Like, comment, subscribe, hype. Thank you, David. I very much appreciate it. And then he also writes, oh, not only was the kneeling down a sportsman thing to do, talking about the end of the game when the Cowboys could not yet kneel down the clock when they had the ball first down and goal inside the Raiders' 10 with 2.5 minutes to go. If they kneeled down the clock 4 straight plays, it wouldn't be enough to run out the clock, which of course prevented them from potentially running up the score. David writes, oh, not only was kneeling down a sportsman thing to do, but it maintained the score a combined 49-94 backwards by taking a knee for kneeling. I don't know if that's the case. If that was any part of the thinking, I get it. I doubt it was, if I'm being totally honest, but it is kind of a poetic twist on the night. So I think that's very interesting there. No doubt about that. It's Juma 3231 writes, I can't stand Dak slander. 17 fourth quarter comebacks, 8th among active QBs, 24 game-winning drives just this year when trailing. He has a QBR of 89.4. Not great compared to 135 when leading, but break it down further in one-score games. QBR 101.5 in 2-score games, 83 when tied, 111.6. Go back to 2023. Those numbers are 89.7 when down points, 105 in 1-score games, 102 score games, and 121 when tied. All that to say, if the game is close, he keeps us in it or wins it. When the game is getting away, he makes mistakes. That's a good point I've made. I think my biggest criticism of Prescott, and this is why I don't put him in the elite category, is because the Mahomeses of the world, the Burrows of the world, the Josh Allens, the Lamar Jacksons, you can be, it can be 13-3, 20-10, 21-10, and the offense isn't doing well. The quarterback's made a couple mistakes, and you're struggling, but they have the ability to kind of flip the script, right? Rodgers in his prime, Brady, Breeze, all those guys, Peyton Manning, the ability to just kind of flip the script and pull out a come from behind victory. Prescott struggles with that. If it's close or if they're leading, he's as good. I mean, he's an all-pro for sure. I think if it's a tight game or if he's leading, he plays like an elite quarterback. But it's that element of when you're down by 10 in the third quarter and you haven't done well, can you flip it and get the team back in the game with some really good performances? And that's something Prescott struggles with for sure. But he's still obviously he's a very good quarterback. It's Jim goes on to write, of course, this doesn't take into account quality of the teams played in playoffs alone, but we got to stop downplaying this quarterback. Man, I think Dak is great. Not elite. Elite players put the team on their back and single-handedly win games, i.e., Mahomes and Allen. I agree 100%. But great players make the plays that are needed to put their team in a spot to succeed, which we've seen Dak do time and time again, whether it's a scramble on third down or a perfect throw to T.Y. Hilton on 3rd and 30. Yeah, I still think that 2022 season, just sidebar to 3rd and 30, was a season where the Cowboys were a championship team. And obviously that close loss where so many things just bounces went against them and Dak did not play well in San Francisco. That's one of those tough losses I think I look back on because that was a championship caliber team for sure. That being said, I would love for him to be more consistent against better teams in big moments. I keep jumping the gun here. I think you're on the same page as me. It's Juma. But it's shown he could do it. Packers his rookie year, Tampa in 23, and then Philly and Packers this year. The next 5 games will show us what him and this team are made of, and I got faith that Dak can get back on that MVP level of play. Let's just cross our fingers the Chiefs get a win this week so they don't come into Dallas on a losing streak. It's one of those things that's funny, that last sentence there. It's sort of a debate I've always had. Would you rather play a team that's on a winning streak and, is maybe ripe for a setback? Or would you rather play a team that's playing poorly and maybe ripe for a bounce back, right? Because you have sort of 2 sides of the coin. You don't want to play teams that are playing great. If they're crushing it, you're like, yikes, don't want to play this team. But that being said, it's the NFL. Everyone's going to have a down game. Long enough timeline, everyone's going to have a dud. So, you play a team that's playing great. You're like, okay, well, maybe they dudded up this week. Or if you play a team that's playing poorly, it's like, okay, they're ready for a bounce back. Maybe they play great this week. I'm a big believer in listen, man, just play. You know what I mean? Just play and let the cards fall where they may, right? It's play good football, good things happen. But it's an interesting debate I've always had is where would you rather play a team that's playing well for a month, expecting a bounce down, or you rather play a team that's really struggling and you're worried about a bounce back, right? It's one of those things that's always very interesting when it comes to matchups. All right, this next comment is from FYX50Tim. Glad that Shadi is slamming the gavel down on discipline and professionalism on this team. One interesting thing I noticed on this game was the absence of many penalties. Aside from the unsportsmanlike conduct from Booker, the team did a good job playing with integrity and composure. Let's keep the momentum into next week. Yeah, it's one of those things when you play a young team with a lot of volatility, you're going to get a lot of penalties, right? It just comes with the territory. You got a lot of guys in new positions, a lot of young guys trying to figure things out, right? Not a lot of veteran groups. And they did play, I think, with a lot of composure and professionalism. I agree with the exception of that dumb Booker penalty. But yeah, let's keep the momentum going on that front for sure. David Dobbins, again, gets in the action once again. Whatever happens in Vegas gets you benched in Vegas. I heard that Sam Williams, Elam, and Sanborn did it too, twice. That's kind of funny, but I think a little bit different situation with those guys. Nothing once again when the other team's quarterback is getting jostled. There's Houston, still unlimited snaps. Davis looked way better than Blue. Blue was just Vaughn 2. Pickens, who I was dead set against trading for, just might be the best wide receiver playing. Turpin is not an NFL wide receiver. Mingo, unfortunately, has been surpassed by his clone Flournoy. My 45-10 prediction doesn't look so stupid now, as well as my hype of Carson. Oh, and Gene T is still looking for all those holes he was bragging about. Guyton getting the LeBron Dramatic Flop Award. That good show of sportsmanship cost me $50 instead of making $1.15. Trifecta, and over was half a point more. Yeah, I mean, it's well, if you predicted 45-10, that's a bold prediction, and you weren't too far off, I guess. Yeah, Jaden Blue's been a disappointment for sure. I'm not going to write him off just yet, but I mean, at a certain point, listen, you got to grow up, and it speaks to the shoddy culture, though. It doesn't matter if you're a young player that you've got a lot of potential. If you're not doing the little things right, you're just not going to dress, right? And I think that's what the Cowboys have said by giving Malik Davis the second running back position while also putting Davis on a lot of special teams. And it could be also, if we look at special teams, again, if you're the second running back, especially with Lipke as kind of the alternate tight end, fullback, running back in certain situations, you're going to be playing a lot of special teams. And there's a good chance Jaden Blue just was struggling on special teams. And if it was a toss-up between Davis and Blue, and let's say Blue was not as good as pass protection and he was struggling on special teams, then I could see why the Cowboys went Malik Davis. A lot of people say you got to play the young guys, but you got to play the young guys if they've actually earned it, right? And this is one of the things Shoddy has talked about in terms of some of these younger guys, whether it's Kalen Carson and Revel and what they've done in practice. And he said they've earned it in practice. I think one of the reasons they opened up the right tackle competition was because they like what Nathan Thomas has done in practice and what he continues to do in practice. And I think allowing players that do good things throughout the week, giving them more opportunities, I think that's the right approach to take. If there are guys who aren't stepping up in practice, you don't hand them reps. You don't hand them opportunities until they've earned it, which makes sense to me. It's Juma3231 also writes, anyone seen Plague Doctor? Yeah, I haven't seen him comment in a while. Hopefully everything's okay. You had some really good thoughts. So if you're watching, if you're still out there, Plague Doctor, feel free to chime in and give us your thoughts on everything we've been talking about. PA Longhorn 421 writes, great point to mention JJ backing Brian in recent personnel decisions. Never would have happened if support wasn't there. He has great leadership skills, unlike former coaches, plus his players are responding. Unfortunately, it took longer for D to get it together, but I'll take what we got. Keep stacking W's, and we'll see. Keep up the great content. Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think one of the underrated elements of Jerry Jones, who's seems to hit on a few trades, whether it's Pickens, Quinnen Williams, the Parsons trade, doesn't seem like a total loss, to put it mildly. There's a chance the Cowboys could come out ahead there. Obviously, the Packers like what they got. Cowboys like what they got. So we'll see what the long-term effects are for both teams. But the reality is Jerry Jones has supported Brian Schottenheimer with a lot of tough decisions, right? Whether it's not playing Jaden Blue, obviously a guy that, Jerry Jones is not an idiot, knows that the fans want to see. Benching Lamb and Pickens for the opening series of the game. I mean, he doesn't do that. Shawnee doesn't do that without knowing Jerry Jones has his back, right? And there's been other decisions as well. Benching Trayvon Diggs, prime time against the Packers, right? Shawnee's made some really tough personnel decisions that, in prior regimes where they didn't feel confident in the ownership support, maybe they wouldn't have made. But Shawnee, I think, understands he's got the backing of Jerry Jones, and Jerry Jones understands Shawnee's goal to build a multi-year program to get things trending for long-term success, not just for a short-term turnaround. Obviously, we'll have to see what the results are, but it's very clear that Jerry Jones and the ownership group, the Jones family, they really support what Shawnee's doing, and they really want to give him time to implement his process and his culture. All right, this next comment is from BMR Collects. Last night's game, Monday night's game, is why I think there's a good chance to be made that Quinnen Williams is going to have a better overall effect on the entire defense than Parsons did. I know people will say the Raiders' O-line sucks, and that's true, but the Cowboys have played other battle lanes and not dominated like that. He is already making Donovan Ezeraku, James Houston, Kenny Clark, Osa, Kenneth Murray, etc. all look better out there. I can't wait to see how they play against a much better team on Sunday. Yeah, there's sort of a compound effect with talent deficiencies, right? Where, if your pass rush is mediocre and then your secondary is mediocre, they both look really bad, right? Because it's one of those things neither can protect the other. But suddenly you add maybe a really good pass rusher like Micah Parsons, and suddenly you're like, wow, our pass rush got better, and now our secondary looks a lot better. And, it's a team game, right? It's one of those things. Did the secondary actually get more talented? No, you just got more help from your teammates, and the secondary didn't get attacked deep as much, right? It's just how things can kind of work. Now, look, I do think this defense is still going to have a lot of volatility, a lot of ups and downs. There's too many new pieces. pieces. There's too much youth for there not to be duds left on the table, and they still have a lot of areas of weakness. But I do think Quinnen Williams can have a massive impact. And they've basically created, because of the defensive tackle position, a matchup nightmare for oppositions. Because how do you stop three really good defensive tackles? Teams have to game plan for it. Do they go a 5 down front, a 2-man rotation, right? How do they attack? The Raiders basically said, we're not even going to try to run because it's going to be a disaster, and it was. What do the Eagles try to do, right? Obviously the Eagles want to run the football. They want to do a lot of different things. They do a lot of things with Jalen Hurts, but it's going to change how teams have to play Dallas. They've created basically a roster now and a strategy other teams have to be concerned of and game plan against, whereas prior to the Quinnen Williams trade, that wasn't the case at all. Teams basically got to attack Dallas exclusively. Now Dallas has a mechanism for attacking offenses, which the opposing offenses will have to account for, and that doesn't even mention the impact. If Overshown can return as a star player, he can be, of course, as we all know, a defensive playmaker at the highest level. So a lot of good news in terms of what the Cowboys are structured defensively. Now we'll have to see about execution, which, of course, as we all know, is the devil in the details there, as we saw the early part of the season, certainly in the secondary. All right, Randy9441 writes, I think the vast majority of fans, including myself, were not mad when Shoddy was hired as a new head coach. They were upset with the process. I wanted a thorough coaching search with multiple interviews/candidates so Dallas could pick the best person for the job. And if that just happened to be Shoddy, then congrats to him. To many of us, it felt like Shoddy was picked because Jerry was familiar with him and then he would not have to break the bank to pay him, considering this was his first head coaching gig. The hire definitely gave me a Dave Campo, Jason Garrett vibe. Well, there's two different... I don't disagree with your line of thinking. I do think their coaching search was far from exhaustive. And listen, we have no idea what Shoddy will be in the long term. He could be a Campo Garrett in terms of how things shake out in the win-loss column. But I do think there were two fundamental flaws with the Campo and Garrett hire that were not recreated here. Number one, Jason Garrett was Jerry's golden boy for a long time. I mean, going back to 2006, right? Or even prior to that. So again, Jerry Jones was so biased. He wanted Jason Garrett probably to be the head coach right after Bill Parcells, if we're being honest, but he felt that was a little early. So they went Wade Phillips as a short-term stopgap. So that was the problem there. That was with Garrett, was Jerry Jones playing a favorite, a guy he had specifically groomed to be the head coach for a long period of time. So that didn't happen with Shoddy, right? Shoddy was not a guy who was brought into Dallas to be a potential heir apparent to Mike McCarthy. Never was even considered, probably not until deeper or after the 2024 season. When it comes to Dave Campo, I think that was a little recreating the past. I think Jerry Jones realized that he totally screwed the pooch with what happened at the end of Jimmy Johnson and felt like as the team was deteriorating, he needed to try and recreate what happened in the early 1990s. And it's like, well, maybe if I can just bring back a guy from that staff, maybe Dave Campo, can he be the guy to kind of recreate that magic? And you can never live in the past. So it's sort of two different flaws there from Jerry. Obviously doesn't mean that this third hire with Shoddy won't prove to be a flawed one, and we'll have to see what Shoddy does long term. Good stuff so far, I think, from Schottenheimer. But I do think, it is a little apples to oranges with the comparison there, but I do agree 100% that the coaching search was not exhaustive. But just because there's an exhaustive search doesn't mean you get it right. I think the Atlanta Falcons, they interviewed Mike McDonald, they interviewed Ben Johnson, I think they interviewed Liam Cohen, I think they interviewed or wanted to interview Mike Vrabel as well. They had no desire for Bill Belichick reportedly. And then, of course, they've got their situation right now with Raheem Morris. Their offensive staff just does not look very good. They're one of the more disappointing teams in football right now, heading toward another losing season with no eye towards the future unless Michael Penix returns from a serious knee injury healthy. A lot of questions about coaching, a lot of questions about leadership. They traded away their first round pick. So, it's one of those things where you can have an exhaustive search and still get it wrong, right? So just because you have a very thorough, detailed process doesn't mean you get it right. So again, we'll have to see what Shoddy does long term, but I do agree at the time in the offseason, I was like, it seems like they definitely shortcutted it a little bit. But listen, if you got the right guy, you got the right guy. So it's something to... if they really liked Shoddy and they really thought he was the right man for the job, then kudos to them for not spending a lot of time and effort, going after guys that, they didn't feel like would actually be the right hire. Emmett is the GOAT writes, I would love some history shows. I started watching about 1978, but I was a kid, really started diving deep into the Cowboys in the 90s. History of the Cowboys could be its own channel. Yeah, I think for the offseason, I'll start doing some history stuff, right? I'll have to figure out the right way to integrate that in, may do it in the daily show, or may make it its own, sort of episode and content paired with it as part of this channel. I think the history stuff is interesting, especially with the Cowboys, so I'll think of a way to do it. I got a few ideas, but I got to sort of, figure out the way to break it down. Once we get into the offseason, right, when there's more time to cover that kind of stuff, certainly, before free agency and the draft and all that kind of all that kind of jazz. But it's definitely coming. So if you make sure you stay tuned for that kind of content this offseason. JCD3869 writes, I like your channel and you know your crap, but my clicks would 3x if I saw they weren't 50-ish minutes long. Talking about the video length. Knowing it is hard to cut it to 15, 20 minutes, but that is the magic number. More is not better. Well, I think there's a few things to talk about there, and every once in a while I'll see someone comment like this, and I get the point, and thank you for the comment. I really appreciate it. But I think there's a few things I just want to bring up. So there's a lot of really good Cowboys content creators. I mean, they're really, really good that make that 15 to 20 minute range. And I'm not trying to, be like them. I'm trying to be a little bit different, right? As anyone watching the video at this point can obviously tell, or anyone who's been a regular viewer, I like to go deeper into the weeds. I like to think about things. I like to pull history stuff into it, get into the numbers, right? Different parts, different thoughts, right? I don't like it to be, because these are, a lot of topics. There's a lot of things to cover and really detailed things to break down. I don't think it's something you can really do in 15, 20 minutes with everything going on. On our flagship NFL channel, which Saturday Morning Inspection is the name of the company, we got a lot of content we create around football. We have 15-ish minute videos that are very specific, detailed concepts. Like, well, for example, break down the Rams' usage of 13 personnel, kind of making something up, right? Or we'll break down one specific rookie's increased snap count on third downs or something, and that'll be like a 15-minute video, right? We'll go really deep in the weeds on one topic, because I feel like, if it's something worth talking about, it's something worth talking thoroughly about. One of the reasons I love a lot of the commentary in the comment section is because there'll be guys that'll comment multiple times. There'll be guys with long comments with a lot of detailed thoughts and a lot of beliefs and a lot of really good research and ideas. I don't want to shortchange it. I want to make sure everyone has time to really incorporate their thoughts, because this is a lot of interesting stuff. At least to me, it's pretty interesting. So, and it's fun, right? It's football. It's the Cowboys, of course. So I don't want to, shortchange the length of content. And I get it. Maybe could I get more clicks? Could I get more, people watching it? Maybe. I mean, you're probably right. But the reality is, it's just not my goal. It's not what I want to do. I want to create good content, as good as I can. And that's why I do listen to feedback, and I appreciate it whenever I get it, in a manner that's, thoughtful and deep and engaged and not shortchanged. I don't want to ever get to the point where it's like, we should have talked about this more. I didn't talk about that, and I really should have. It's one of the reasons why we bring up the reporters and go into deep dives and all this when I do this daily show here. Again, we do 15, 20-minute videos for specific film reviews, right? Like the Quinnen Williams one that went out yesterday, Ezra who's going out today, where that's literally one player, a deep dive. We're talking like 6, 7 plays, right? And that's 15, 20 minutes. Very isolated, very narrow scope. There's no way, in my opinion, you could do it justice covering the news of the day for the Cowboys in 15, 20 minutes. You just can't. You can't provide the proper context, at least according to me, right? Other people, I'm sure they do great at it, and there's a lot of great content out there in that time frame. But in my mind, you can't do it good justice by, all the news of the day, all the details, all the nuances, all the context, all the different viewpoints in 15 to 20 minutes. I just don't think it's doable. And that's just my opinion, right? And again, I want to create content that follows that process. And there's a lot of other people that do shorter form, and they're fantastic, and I highly recommend them. They're great at what they do. I just want to do things a little bit differently. All right, that's the comments for today. Obviously, like I talk about all the time, keep enjoying the victory. There is a 48-hour rule for fans, right? 24-hour rule for players, 48 hours for fans. So we have, I think, till Wednesday evening to enjoy this win. Like I said, Ezra film review coming out later today. Quinnen Williams, of course, had the film review out yesterday. Check it out if you haven't already. And I will be here tomorrow once again for our next daily show. But until then, I am Nick, and this is Saturday Morning Inspection.